The name Rothschild instantly invokes images of enormous wealth, power, and prestige stretching across centuries. The mere whisper of the name Rothschild tells a tale of financial royalty that still captivates the imagination more than 200 years later. But how did one family manage to establish a globe-spanning banking and finance empire that has endured the test of time, while dynasty after dynasty withered into obscurity? Well, today, we're taking a behind-the-scenes tour into some of the most controversial moments propelling the meteoric rise of the Rothschild mega-dynasty. Drama, war, opportunity, deception. This is a roller coaster story of audacious family ambition, interwoven with major turning points in European and world history. So, buckle up for some shocking tales of crisis exploitation on the Rothschild road to riches. Our story begins in the late 1700s with German-born Mayer Amschel Rothschild. Mayer laid the early foundations for the family dynasty in the Frankfurt Jewish ghetto by establishing a small banking house. Though successful locally, the Rothschild name remained relatively unknown. That all changed with Mayer's 5 sons, whom he strategically installed across Europe to represent the family business interests. Eldest son Amschel Mayer stayed in Frankfurt. Solomon ventured to Vienna. Nathan headed to London, with Karl establishing the Naples branch and James representing Paris. This network laid the groundwork for their domino-like expansion of financial power across the continent. As fate would have it, the Rothschild sons entered the broader European banking scene just as the tumult of the Napoleonic Wars threw traditional trading and government financing systems into disarray. This was a crisis for some, but an opportunity for others. Armies marching across Europe under Napoleon's banner urgently needed paying, feeding, and supplying. Sensing the prospects, the UK granted Nathan Rothschild the coveted role of chief broker to the Bank of England during conflict times. In this position of power and influence, Nathan became the key financier, bankrolling Britain and its allies by supplying gold for armies, making loans to allies, and delivering cash subsidies to European rulers when needed. This war financing made the Rothschild family an indispensable pillar of strength behind Britain's long military campaign against Napoleon. Some historians argue these practices verged on unscrupulous war profiteering by growing fat off conflict. Then again, others debate reasonable commission was deserved for such necessary financial services. Either way, their fortunes accelerated rapidly as war dragged on for over a decade. The House of Rothschild swelled in wealth, prominence, and political connections. By 1810, just 6 years into conflict, the family syndicate had become one of Europe's chief financiers, with prominent clientele including nobility, royals, governments, and churches. Yet even greater opportunity came as Napoleon edged toward defeat. Following the earlier Battle of Leipzig, which forced Napoleon's retreat, Europe watched anxiously to see if Britain could deal the final blow against the Emperor. On June 18, 1815, the Battle of Waterloo became the climax that doomed Napoleon for good. News was desperately sought on the outcome, but heavy rains delayed couriers. Legend tells that Nathan Rothschild exploited this information delay in the most opportunistic way through insider trading. Using early private knowledge of Wellington's victory at Waterloo, he allegedly manufactured concerns of a British defeat while secretly buying up masses of British government bonds. When official news broke the next day that Britain had decisively won, stocks soared up to 30% instantly, exponentially multiplying the Rothschild wealth in mere hours. Debate continues whether this notorious Waterloo legend is fact or fiction. Regardless, historians affirm the Rothschilds invisibly amassed vast fortunes through war financing and strategic deals over this era to become the dominant force in European finance for the next 200 years. By 1817, the Rothschild bankroll equaled 5 times the wealth of their nearest British rival. Whatever one makes of their ruthless ingenuity, the evidence is clear. The Napoleonic War investment springboarded the dynasty to extraordinary heights. Few could have ever imagined just decades earlier when the brothers were mere apprentice merchants in the Frankfurt ghetto. Their support of nations during major wars was often crucial, making them an integral cog that helped turn the wheels of history. Fast forward to the mid-1800s, the House of Rothschild's global banking network was firmly entrenched across Europe. Eldest son Lionel now headed the London branch, taking over from Nathan after his death in 1836. In the United States, their dispersing agent August Belmont originally sailed across the Atlantic during 1837 to oversee the family's interests in America, where their railroad and government finance dealings were rapidly expanding the family's wealth and political influence. As Rothschild power and capital grew globally, critics increasingly attacked their lack of national loyalty, given they partnered with any government that could benefit business, regardless of borders. August Belmont, as Rothschild agent, became a target of attacks, with suspicions of manipulating American finance and politics to favor European interests. Nonetheless, when the American Civil War erupted in 1861 between the industrial North and cotton plantation-driven South over slavery and states' rights issues, the House of Rothschild once again sought opportunities to profit from funding governments during turmoil. Though not involved in battlefield financing like during the Napoleonic Wars, huge demand now existed for merchant banking services to raise funds purchasing weapons plus managing chapters of credit and bonds. Economic historian Niall Ferguson estimates the Civil War amplified the Rothschild family's wealth exponentially. The South desperately needed credit to import arms and supplies. Napoleon III of France persuaded the House of Rothschild to act as fiscal agents, securing these funds and deals shrouded in some secrecy, given Union blockades banning import traffic. Though Abraham Lincoln's government left no clear paper trail showing Rothschild involvement, historians conclude this secret fiscal aid from France flowed via underground Rothschild channels through connections of agents like Belmont. When the South ultimately crumbled to Union forces, frank discussions reveal the House of Rothschild shifted allegiances to bankroll post-Civil War Reconstruction bonds for Lincoln's government. Whatever the rumors of Rothschild political puppetry during Civil War years, these events undoubtedly embedded their banking dynasty further into the American economy. Some critics denounced the Rothschilds as traitors and war profiteers for seeming to play both sides without national allegiance. However, others argued without their financial conduits, international funds could never have flowed to sustain governments. Once again, through such controversial dealings tied to war and power broking, the House of Rothschild cemented their credentials as indispensable banking facilitators on the global stage, amassing ever more staggering wealth that endured for generations to come. As the decades passed, a clear pattern emerged. The House of Rothschild had a keen instinct for capitalizing on wars, revolutions, and disasters to expand their power and wealth. When political upheaval left governments desperate, the Rothschilds struck lucrative deals to prop up regimes in return for exclusive concessions, contracts, and favors maximizing family profits. Critics argued this disaster capitalism amounted to unethical wartime profiteering. But was the House of Rothschild villain or hero? Their actions saved governments when no other institutions offered support, yet they extracted handsome rewards. Take the early 1830s, for example. A series of damaging loans crashed governments across Europe, including Portugal, Spain, and parts of Germany. Chaos reigned until Rothschild branches stepped in with strategic rescue loans in exchange for lucrative terms and conditions. Nathan Rothschild structured sweetheart deals, collecting extortionately high commissions and interest rates from foreign governments in crisis. In the Austrian Empire, Salomon Rothschild exploited political weakness to force concessions, like scrapping tolls hampering commodity trading. This immensely boosted his profits, but some condemned Salomon for seemingly holding a country ransom until extracting self-serving business terms. Such opportunism helped the Rothschilds accumulate enormous wealth, but their war dealings attracted public suspicion about excessive power and influence unmatched by royal families. Critics spread conspiracy theories of the Rothschilds manipulating political events to engineer crises benefiting their own interests. Were they profiting from misery or fulfilling necessary duties? Without House of Rothschild support, would wars still be won or lost? Determining hero from villain remains subjective, but leveraging disasters certainly helped the Rothschild dynasty entrench astounding wealth for generations to come. By the mid-1800s, the House of Rothschild's grip over European finance and politics was unrivaled after decades of strategic expansion across borders. This was particularly so in France, where Rothschild business interests penetrated strongly. The Rothschild Bank financed major public works, like railway infrastructure, while collecting taxes and managing loans on behalf of the French government. Such indispensability gave them increasing control over messaging systems between countries. With early telegraph networks in their infancy, nations relied heavily on Rothschild couriers for secure communication. Come the 1848 wave of political revolutions, all major nations' official messaging flowed through an infrastructure backbone owned by the Rothschild family. This meant Austrian, Prussian, Russian, British, Ottoman, and French government communication traveled via stations operated by the Rothschilds. Owning such indispensable telegraph wires, supplying intelligence on political affairs, afforded the House enormous influence over countries' decision-making during the turmoil of 1848. Rothschild agents covertly accessed confidential information on unfolding events and dynamics between nations. The insider knowledge enabled the bank to respond quickest to changing landscapes for further profit. When uprisings overturned regimes, Rothschild-controlled messaging wires continued humming behind the scenes to ensure government stability favoring their interests. Such intelligence flows ensured House of Rothschild reactions beat competitors. Via this monopolization of messaging systems, the dynasty enjoyed bigger political influence than most official state departments during 1848's conflicts. Their speed of communication expanded financial and power interests enormously to become indispensable partners entwined with European governments for decades to follow. The early 20th century world wars again saw old regimes topple and traditional European finance houses struggle or disappear altogether. But the House of Rothschild emerged strongly once more, seizing fresh opportunities, financing post-war reconstruction. This time, though, accusations arose of the dynasty wielding excessive political leverage to shape the future Middle East to favor their Zionist interests through the controversial Balfour Declaration in 1917. What was this declaration? Essentially, a public statement of Britain's support for establishing a Jewish national homeland in Palestine. It promised Rothschild and Zionist leaders a central role shaping the future governance of Palestine after Ottoman rule ended. The timing was crucial. Britain wanted American military support to defeat Germany as World War I raged. Critics highlighted the Balfour Declaration was only finalized after certain Rothschild figures like Edmund James de Rothschild allegedly promised to leverage their unrivaled political connections to convince American President Woodrow Wilson into declaring war support for Britain and its allies. Once secured, Britain would repay the favor via the declaration's promise to realize Rothschild Zionist ambitions for Jewish autonomy in Palestine after the war. Even more controversially, historical records suggest the British intelligence officer drafting the declaration, Leopold Amery, secretly consulted Rothschilds on its wording. However, counter-arguments say the British government already sympathized with general Zionist aims anyway, regardless of Rothschild lobbying. Plus, declarations are non-binding, and the statement's impact was largely symbolic for some years. Either way, the Balfour Declaration had monumental historical impact. Its assurances were a turning point accelerating Jewish migrations to Palestine after 1919, once Ottoman dominance dissolved. For Arab Palestinians already living there, however, the declaration remains a symbol of colonial betrayal and historical injustice. So, did Rothschild influence single-handedly reshape Middle Eastern geopolitics for generations via this controversial declaration? Historical interpretations still divide opinion today, but it remains a prime example of the wide-reaching power and political connections the dynasty accumulated over 2 centuries, embedding their family's interests into global affairs. The story of the Rothschild dynasty spans multiple generations, persistently leveraging war, disaster, and crisis into dazzling fortune as a pillar of strength behind governments. For supporters, their financial injections nurtured stability, but critics argue unethical profiteering from exploiting countries at their most vulnerable. Love them or loathe them, the House of Rothschild's secretive wheelings and dealings irrevocably altered the course of history, while cementing enduring wealth and power. They rose from obscurity to financing royalty within decades, thanks to the Founding Fathers' shrewd placement of his 5 gifted sons in key global finance centers. So, what's your take? Hero supporting nations in crisis, or villain profiting from catastrophe? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. And be sure to subscribe and click the notification bell. That way, you won't miss our next Hidden History feature.